Okay, let's just jump right in. You know, at the core of any society, there's this basic promise, right? That the folks in charge of justice, the police, the courts, are going to play it straight. But what happens when that promise shatters? When the people who are supposed to enforce the law become the criminals? Well, it's not just a crime anymore. It's something much deeper. It's a total betrayal of the trust that holds our whole world together.
Yeah, in this quote, it really nails it. We're not just talking about a few bad apples here. This is about the very foundation of public trust just crumbling away. I mean, think about it. When the system you count on to protect you is the one that's actually hurting you, it makes you question everything. It shakes the legitimacy of the state itself. The stakes, they're as high as they get.
So you gotta ask, how does this kind of rot even set in? Where does it start? Well, it begins with something called a culture of impunity. And that's really just a fancy way of saying that the people in power start to believe they're above the law, that the rules, they're for everyone else. And that is the perfect breeding ground for corruption to just take over. And what's wild is that you see this same pattern popping up all over the globe. I mean, look at this list. In Chicago, you had judges literally selling verdicts for cash. You go to Queensland, Australia, and the cops are running huge protection rackets. Over in the Czech Republic, it's the Prime Minister's own office abusing its power. London, a detective just straight up framing innocent people. And then Russia, we're talking about massive embezzlement right at the core of their military. It's like different countries, different systems, but the exact same sickness.
And then there's this quote from the corrupt London detective, Derek Ridgewell. When asked why, there's no big speech, no complicated reason, I just went bent. Wow. It's so simple, it's chilling. It really shows you how casual, how mundane this kind of betrayal can be. It's not always some grand conspiracy.
But here's the thing. Even when things look their worst, the truth has a way of coming out. It doesn't just stay buried. So how does it happen? How does this rot finally get exposed? It almost always starts with a single spark. A spark of accountability from someone who just refuses to let it go. So who are these agents of change, and what do they do? Well, they come in all shapes and sizes, really. In Australia, it was all about investigative journalism. A TV show, Four Corners, did an expose that was so explosive, it basically forced the government to act. Then you have the US, where it took this incredibly bold FBI sting operation. They bugged a judge's chambers. That had never been done before. And in the Czech Republic, it was a newly empowered prosecutor's office that finally had the guts to aim right for the top, the Prime Minister's office. Okay, so exposing the corruption, that's a huge step. But honestly, it's only half the battle. Because what happens after the scandal breaks, that's when you really see what a system is made of. And what we see are two totally different roads a country can go down. One is the road to actual reform, and the other is the road to a political purge. And this slide, right here, this is really the central idea of this whole explainer. On one side, you have the democratic response. Now, it's not always perfect, right? But the playbook is usually an independent investigation, a focus on the rule of law. You get new watchdog groups. The goal at the end of the day is to fix the system. But on the other side, the authoritarian response, it's just an internal power struggle. It's all about political control. Fighting corruption isn't about justice. It's just a weapon you use to get rid of your enemies. And to really get a grip on that authoritarian path, you need to know this word, kleptocracy. It's simple, really. It's when corruption isn't a bug, a problem in the system. No, corruption is the system. It's the whole point. Power exists for one reason, to make the people at the top rich, and to keep them in charge. And this is the perfect lens for looking at what happens in Russia.
So, with that idea of kleptocracy in mind, let's look at the recent arrest of this guy, Timur Ivanov, Russia's deputy defense minister. Sure, he was charged with taking massive bribes, but make no mistake, this was not about cleaning house. This was a classic political purge. You had one powerful group using Ivanov's corruption, which, let's be honest, everyone already knew about, as an excuse to take him and his boss out of the picture. It was all about reasserting the Kremlin's control over the massive river of money flowing through the military.
And that brings us to the last part of the story, and maybe the hardest part, the aftermath. Because even when the bad guys get caught, even when reforms are made, these kinds of scandals, man, they cast a really, really long shadow. Rebuilding that broken trust, that's a whole different battle, and it's a long one.
I mean, just look at this timeline for the Derek Ridgewell case. In 1972, he framed a group of innocent young men known as the Oval Four. It took until 2019, 47 years, for their names to be cleared. Think about that, almost a half-century. It just goes to show you that justice can be this slow, grinding machine, and a lot of the time it comes way too late for the people who are hurt the most.
And that long, slow process, it just grinds down public trust. Let's go back to the Czech Republic for a second. A decade after their big scandal, after all the reforms and new governments, you'd think trust would bounce back, right? Well, how many people reported having high trust in their government? Just 19%. That's it, 19.
That number, 19%, it tells you something really important. You can write all the new laws you want, you can set up new oversight committees, but you can't just pass a law and make people trust you again. It doesn't work that way. These scandals leave these deep, deep scars on the public psyche, and those scars can take generations to fade.
So if a single new law won't cut it, what will? Well, the big takeaway from all these stories, from Chicago to the Kremlin, is that you need a whole ecosystem of accountability. It's not one thing, it's everything working together. You need judges who can't be bought. You need a press that's free to dig for the truth. You need permanent watchdog groups that have real teeth. And maybe most important of all, you need a public that stands up and demands integrity. A public that says, nope, we're not putting up with this.
And that brings us full circle, right back to that fundamental promise between us and the state. Protecting that promise, it's not a one-time thing, it's a constant fight. So I'll leave you with this question to think about. When you look at this ecosystem, the courts, the press, the watchdogs, what does it look like where you live? What parts are strong and what parts maybe need defending? At the end of the day, what's protecting the promise of justice in your world?